All right. Hey, thanks for having us. Hey, Lucas, how you doing? You're still on mute, Lucas.
How's it going?
That's how all these things start. How are you
They
doing?
always start like this.
All right. So tonight we're making Mapo Tofu, which I sort of feel like we all know, but we should really just start at the very beginning here with a very simple question that I think might have a very complicated answer, which
Sure.
is, what is Mapo Tofu?
So, this is one of my favorite topics. This is one of my favorite things to talk about because Mapo tofu is one of the most misunderstood dishes in the Chinese sort of culinary canon. And misunderstanding cuisine isn't always necessarily a bad thing. In fact, I think misunderstanding food is a core component of the evolution of specific dishes. So, Mapo tofu, one may trace back to its origins in Sichuan and Chengdu, a Chengdu style Sichuan cooking. And it was invented in a restaurant not so long ago called Chen Mapo. So, Chen Mapo is this restaurant in the big street, and I cooked there before actually. And they invented this dish because Mapo technically means sort of the pockmarked skin of a person. And Chen Mapo would have been a pockmarked old lady by the name of Chen. And she is said to have invented this dish, this super savory, I guess, ragu-like beef-based sort of like tofu dish that has doubanjiang, which is a Sichuan fava bean paste. It's got chili oil. It's got scallions. It's got chives. It's got ginger in it. No, actually no ginger, and garlic in it, and all these sort of delicious things. And up until now, they've sold probably like millions and millions of these dishes out of
Wait,
this one
how
restaurant.
long ago are we talking about here?
I think actually somebody is going to have to fact check me on this, but I want to say it's within the last 100 years.
Yeah.
For sure. It is not an ancient dish. And the other thing to keep in mind is Sichuan cooking, a lot of people feel as this very, very traditional dish, but it's actually pretty recent. I mean, according to the sources I've read, the chili pepper itself doesn't make it into Sichuan until the 1700s, which is to say we've only been eating spicy Sichuan food for about 300 years. For those of you who are watching who are interested in Sichuan cooking, it's perhaps important to remember that Sichuan itself is a very regional place, and there's lots of different types of cooking, but there are a couple of like standout dishes that I think have sort of exited and been exported from Sichuan into the rest of the world, which I suppose is what I'm more interested in than the origin story. The origin story of of Mapo tofu is kind of somebody makes a really delicious dish, everybody loves it, and people can't stop cooking it, and that's kind of it, right? The more interesting story about Mapo tofu, I think, is when it leaves Sichuan and goes to the rest of the world. There are limitless variations of Mapo tofu, and I will say that I'm from Hong Kong. I grew up in Hong Kong.
Mm,
I came to the US when I was 18, so that was about 8 years ago. And up until that point, I had never had Sichuan food,
really?
which is to say that I'd never had Mapo tofu that was like spicy. I grew up
Mm,
eating this home style Mapo tofu that was based on ground pork, that was mostly a brown sauce. It had garlic, ginger, and scallion. It was deeply savory and obviously delicious and liquidy, and it could have been like a pasta sauce, is how I grew up with it. Sometimes there were peas in there, sometimes there's bok choy, Chinese broccoli. And so that's not really the sort of vividly fiery red image of Sichuan Mapo tofu that we have. Now, beyond sort of Cantonese home cooking, you might look at Mapo tofu in other parts of China, and then you'd look at Mapo tofu in places like Japan, which is perhaps my favorite iteration of Mapo tofu, because this is what happens. Mapo tofu goes to Japan via a chef by the name of Chen Kenmin. And Chen Kenmin was the first Chinese Iron Chef in the Iron Chef television show. And he opens a Sichuan restaurant in Tokyo. Um, uh, Keep in mind at this point that a lot of Japanese cooking is based on like Chinese food. So a lot of people might not know, but like ramen, which is perhaps one of the most recognizable Japanese dishes, is definitely something that was cooked by Chinese immigrants in the beginning. So, you know, there are all these like variations and regional variations of Chinese food in Japan. And Chen Kenmin goes on Iron Chef, and in his restaurant, he makes mapo tofu, and you know he wins a bunch of awards, he wins a bunch of shows. He then uses that mapo technique and uses it on eggplants into the tofu. The reasoning from a chef's perspective being that both are soft. Tofu and eggplant are both soft, but maybe they'll absorb the food and absorb those flavors in a different way. And then Mapo nasu was born. And Mapo eggplant as in a lot of Japanese people's eyes, a quintessential Chinese dish, which is made from pork. The base soybean paste is not doubanjiang, but it's sometimes it's what they call doubanjiang, which is a sort of Japanese version of the same thing, a little bit spicy. But in home versions, oftentimes miso. Instead of Shaoxing wine, you'll find sake and mirin. Instead of the red Sichuan peppercorn, you'll find a green Sichuan peppercorn cousin called sansho. And so the dish, the flavor has totally changed just by sort of adjusting the dials on all of the components. But its essence as a saucy, ragu-y type of thing that you eat with rice is the same. It's just that the flavor is totally different. The ingredients are totally different and all this stuff. And that's not even to say, there are countless variations of this too, because here in the US, Chinese American Mapo Tofu is different from Cantonese Mapo Tofu. It's got a lot of vegetables. It's got oyster sauce in it. It's like brown. It's not red. And not to mention all the sort of other innovations. For some of you might be in LA. In LA, my good friend's restaurant, Nightshade, Maylin's restaurant, they make a Mapo lasagna. I was part of a pop-up the other day and we made a vegan Mapo Tofu pizza. It's just this it seems to be more of a mindset than it is an actual dish. That's a really long, and you're right. This is very
I knew what I was getting into here. I mean, these questions have super complicated answers. And by the way, if you guys have questions for Lucas or for me, please post them in the chat panes on YouTube or on Facebook. But so do you remember the first time that you had it? What appealed to you? The first time, or was it just given to you and it was dinner and you just had to eat it?
Yeah, I can't remember.
When did it go from being a thing to an obsession?
Right. It was a thing in my childhood. Tofu and pork go very, very well together. I think it's got this silky, slippery texture that I really enjoyed. But the mind-blowing moment probably, honestly, was here in the US. The first time I think I had a Sichuan style Mapo Tofu is at Mission Chinese, which I think is an incredibly important restaurant. Mission Chinese is a restaurant that's run by Chef Danny Bowen, who himself is ethnically Korean but adopted and grew up in Oklahoma. And he grew up, or rather he came to become a chef in making Italian food and ended up doing these Chinese pop-ups and serving Mapo Tofu that I think I would say kickstarted the Mapo Tofu sort of obsession in the US. Mm-hmm. But the first time having that dish and seeing that it was glossy red, there's this thick insulating layer of red oil on top of this tofu, that the sauce was not entirely emulsified, that was based out of beef and pork, and tasting this sort of layers and layers of flavors. I was well, I did not know Chinese food was capable of this. And I would say perhaps this is a little bit of a segue to say that my personal mission, even as a Chinese chef, is to figure out what sort of the treasures of Chinese cooking are. I consider myself a sort of student of Chinese cooking. I came to cook Chinese food actually via Japan. Despite growing up in Hong Kong, I was under the impression that Japanese food was the best food in the world. And I cooked in Japan for a very long time in the fancy kaiseki restaurants. And it wasn't until I was at this 3-star Michelin restaurant called Kikunoi Honten. And it wasn't until I was there and speaking with a chef on my last day that he said, sometimes it's worth thinking about the food that's in your blood. And I said, I've always thought Japanese food was just the top of it. And now since then, since the last, I would say 6 or 7 years or so, I've dedicated myself to exploring Chinese food because I think it's massively underrated. So anyway, here is a basic Mapo Tofu that I think draws most of its influence from a little bit of the Cantonese sort of brown sauce technique with a little bit of that basis of Sichuan style building of the flavors of Mapo Tofu, and finally sort of the Japanese version that is a little bit sort of sweeter and I would say more rounded out, so it isn't so aggressive and you can actually probably eat this every day.
Is this what you make for yourself? Is this how you make it for yourself?
I would say that, again, Mapo Tofu is an attitude, and so you can Mapo anything, is kind of the thought. So I'll walk you through, as I'm cooking this, I'll walk you through some of the sort of different steps and what the ingredients are doing. And we did post a recipe down below in the description for those of you who want to cook along. But by no means is anything in that recipe really necessary. Feel free to substitute. Use whatever you have in your fridge. As long as you understand the basic steps of how to activate flavor and build those layers, you could really be mapoing anything. You could be mapoing your white beans. You could maybe even make, I'm staring at a loaf of ciabatta, and I bet you can mapo bread pudding. I bet you can mapo sweet potatoes. You just have to understand building that mindset, and it's all yours.
Mapo sloppy Joe.
Yeah, exactly. I would say, I've had chefs come up to me and tell me that this is defamation of Sichuan cuisine. I cook in China a lot. Before COVID, I was cooking in China for about a month a year. And I would speak to a lot of these traditional chefs, and they would be, sort of shocked, and they would expect a young kid like me to be cooking in the U.S. to show people the greatness of traditional Chinese food. But I think the beauty of Chinese cooking is that it's constantly evolving. It is so diverse, it's so colorful that it necessitates a sort of natural evolution by the way of the movement of people. And so this is a home style version. Everything is substitutable sort of version. But if you want to get started, we could definitely.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to add is that when I was in Chengdu about 10 years ago to do research myself on this food, I learned how to make Mapo Tofu from this 75-year-old guy, this dad of a food blogger. And he's 75. This is 10 years ago. He'd been in the army in the 40s and the 50s. He'd been out in the countryside. And I wanted to know, like, all right, you're going to show me how to make this dish. First of all, am I using beef or pork, or is it vegetarian? Like, what's the answer? What's the answer?
Yeah.
Like, you use whatever you want. Like when we were out in the jungle, when we were in the mountains, we use whatever meat we have at hand. You can use beef, you can use pork, you can use lamb. It doesn't matter. You think of it as this canonical dish, but it's how every family makes it themselves. How everybody likes it.
Yeah.
So show us.
I've done a lot of research on and trying to understand how Chinese food moves throughout the world. And most of the time it just comes down to the techniques of building flavor move with immigration, and they move with the people when people move. But the ingredients are totally substituted. In every sort of regional Chinese cuisine outside of China, that's what happens. It's when Chinese people remember how to cook something, but they don't have what they used to cook with. That's how you come up with new dishes.
Exactly. All right, let's get down to it. Show us what we actually need to make this thing.
So I'm just gonna move this angle up a little bit so you can see me while I'm speaking. However, sorry about that. And then I'll show you in the other angle some of the ingredients that we're working with. So in Chinese cooking, we like to call some ingredient 主料, which is the main ingredients, and then 辅料, which is kind of the seasoning. So the main ingredients here are, today I'm using a ground beef. This, I believe, is an 80% ground beef, which is slightly on the fattier side. I live here in New York, and for whatever reason, without going to Chinatown, I can't get ground pork. So this is ground beef. Ground beef is sort of a nice deep flavor. So you obviously would want to use a high quality ground beef if possible. Now here's the tofu. The tofu, this is a soft tofu. A good quality tofu absolutely matters. It is, some people call it silken, some people call it soft, but this is, you can see that it's tender, but it needs to be firm and it needs to be tight. The reason for that is you don't want to expel too much water during the cooking process. But what a lot of people don't know is that, go ahead.
So, I mean, this comes up all the time. Anytime I talk about Mapo Tofu with friends, is like soft, silken, or firm. But so you're saying silken, but you're also using the word firm.
Yes, I think, here's the thing. So tofu, I don't want to dive too deep into this because I feel like people might not actually get to cook with it. But tofu in the US, we really want to categorize as a soft, medium, or firm, but that's not exactly the case because it depends on what the coagulant, what you use to set the tofu, but it also matters, every manufacturer has its own way of describing the tofu. So I think silken tofu is the nicest way to create a tofu that, Mapo tofu that you eat with rice. But I would say that a medium tofu is easier to handle for home cooks. And actually Cantonese cooks in Chinese American restaurants in New York oftentimes prefer firm tofu just because it is so much easier to handle at large volumes. Today we're using, I guess the packaging says soft. So that's the tofu. Actually, I'm going to take this in here first, and then we're going to talk about some aromatics, so things that smell good. So here is the basic garlic ginger scallion. Know that the chef of Chen Mapo, the current chef of Chen Mapo, hates the use of ginger in this dish, but we're going to do it anyway. I think it creates a nice balance, but he says ginger is way too overpowering. And also, this is not traditional in the sense of the Sichuan cooking, but this is douchi, so this is fermented black beans. Fermented black beans are a great punch of saltiness and savoriness, but a lot of people forget that you actually have to rinse these. So when you buy these from a Chinese supermarket, make sure you soak it for 5 minutes, rinse it off, so that the salt that's on the outside is gone. Otherwise, it's going to overpower your dish. The reason for that, because this doubanjiang, this is pixian doubanjiang, which is pixian is an area of Sichuan. This is the doubanjiang that's from that region. As you can tell, this is not a soybean paste. These are fava bean pastes. It's also very salty and very spicy. So we're going to use this. Sparingly. This doubanjiang, often at home, I like to mix with miso, which is the Japanese version of sort of like bean paste, fermented bean paste. And so the two combined, I think, produces a sort of like more rounded flavor. But I ran out of miso, so this is what we're going to use today.
How spicy is that?
This is really quite spicy. I mean, if you had it on its own, I would give it like 2 points over 2 points over sriracha, but the main flavor here is the saltiness. So a lot of times, people at home who make Mapo Tofu, I was cooking with somebody's auntie in Chengdu, and she doesn't add any salt to her Mapo, because this is it. Now back to the aromatics, a couple of other things. We mentioned Sichuan peppercorn. This is sansho. So this is a green Sichuan peppercorn. Obviously, this also exists in Sichuan. Often further away from the river that runs in the middle of Sichuan, you'll find regional cooking that has more peppercorns that are green instead of red. The flavor, I would say, is a little bit more grassy, a little bit more earthy, a little less floral. And usually this is used in 2 stages: one in making the chili oil, and second in finishing on the top of the Mapo Tofu as a ground thing. The oil that we're using today, actually a couple of other important things is chicken stock. This is just the chicken stock that I made at home, but you can also use water if you don't have stock. Beef stock also obviously works really well. Vegetable stock if you're making a vegetarian one. And I also have some rendered beef tallow, beef fat, which I'm going to use instead of oil, just because you want to, amp up that beefy flavor. But that's basically it. The first thing we need to do is I'm just going to chop up these aromatics. This is the scallion. So scallions have a green part and a white part. I like to use them differently. The green we're going to use to start the pan for the aromatics portion of this. And then the green we're going to save. I'm going to use some of this to start the pan. And then the rest we're going to use as a garnish. Here. Chop that up. This we'll save on the side. Ginger, we're going to use sparingly in case the chef of Chen Mapo comes to haunt me in my dreams. Wait, Matt,
this is where the angry YouTube comments start coming in.
Yeah, I know. People often, it's not a cooking video on YouTube unless people tell you to sharpen your knife. So tell me about when did you go to Sichuan, and what was the purpose?
I was there, I think, in, let's say, 2010. I went there for Saveur magazine just because I love Sichuan food. I like spicy food in general, and I'm relatively obsessed with chili peppers. I've been doing a lot of research about how chili peppers spread around the world, the routes that they took, the ways that they made it into different cuisines. And I mean, Sichuan is just kind of maybe not an epicenter of the transmission of chilies, but one of the places in the world that uses more chilies more often in more dishes than almost anywhere else. So I went there just to see what the food was really like. I've eaten in all these Sichuan restaurants here in New York, and it's like, I know that the stuff is great, but I want to see what's different, what's special, what's what it's like to actually eat there rather than just eating the dishes that come from there. So I went and spent about 10 days just eating my way through Chengdu. And spent maybe another week or so in Chongqing as well. And I mean, burn my face off on a regular basis.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that surprised me most about the food in Sichuan itself is there were so many fresh chilies. When I eat in Sichuan restaurants here in the U.S., it's all dried chilies, dried, maybe some pickled. But there were tons and tons of like freshly chopped, fresh chilies, topping dishes cooked into things. And it just added this whole like, fifth dimension of spice to everything else, to everything that I was eating. And it was refreshing and surprising. And it felt like the kind of thing that I wasn't going to get anywhere in the U.S.
Yeah. I mean, my favorite thing about Sichuan is also that a lot of Sichuanese cooking isn't red, but it can still be spicy and it can still be so numbing. And I love that, like that manipulation of that like numbing ma'a spice with like fresh herbs and stuff is such a beautiful song of sort of what Sichuan cooking is all about, which is building those flavor profiles.
Yeah. So let's talk about what the Sichuan flavor profile is. I think we sort of danced around it a little bit, but like I know it's known as mala.
Yeah.
And
so
I hear that a lot. What is that? What does that mean? And what are we talking about?
So the cool thing about Sichuan cooking is that when you're thinking about the cuisines that sort of do well and are well represented in the Chinese canon, oftentimes it's not just what's the most delicious, but what is well cataloged and what's sort of like well documented. And so Sichuan cuisine, more than almost any other cuisine, has done an excellent job, whether it's through its cooking schools or via sort of the old sort of like imperial system in Sichuan, had documented the specific flavor profiles of Sichuan cooking. So mala is only one of them. And they like to say that there are 24, I believe, 24 different types of profiles. And by profiles, they mean like sweet and sour, like savory, or like a fish saucy or yuxiang flavor, or a xianxiang, which is like salty and aromatic. And so they have like these very specific sort of, this dish belongs to this flavor profile category. And so a lot of Sichuan cooking, I think the meta structure is about how ingredients play off of each other. Mala, I would say, is by far the most popular. There's a saying in China now that 中国吃一片红, which is to say that all of China is eating red. Some people believe that to be a political statement. Other people believe it to be that Sichuan food and hot pot is just taking over the land, which I think is very much true. But anyway, so I'm just gonna start cooking, I think, here. So here you'll see I'll dice up the aromatics. We are cooking at home after all, so some of the knife work is a little shoddy. Feel free to insult me in the comments. Put all this to the side, and then I'm going to cut the tofu as well. So now a really important step that a lot of people gloss over and forget is that you have to blanch your tofu. There's just no choice around it. The reason for this is blanching the tofu does two things. So tofu is filled with water. And one common principle in Chinese cooking is that water doesn't taste like the ingredient. Water just tastes like water. So everything you want to do prior to the cooking is to take the water out. And you can do that by applying heat to the tofu to press out some of that sort of like raw soybean flavor as well. It also curbs some of those raw soybean flavors, because tofu at the end of the day is uncooked when you buy it. You can't just really eat it out of the packet. People do that. It's kind of weird. But that's the main number one first reason. The second is we're actually going to blanch it in a little bit of salt water, which is to say that we're going to season the tofu gently. I think that gives it a little bit more it gives the tofu a little bit more of a backbone for when we actually go into it.
I'm gonna have to try that next time. My usual thing is just to sort of like have it balanced on my hand as everything else is cooking underneath, like slice it carefully and like hope I don't drop a finger into the dish. But I'll blend now on if you tell me.
While I cook that tofu, the other thing to do with your meat is you actually have to pre-cook your meat as well. So here I have a pan. This is carbon steel. And on the other hand, I also have a pot of water that's waiting to boil. So in this pan, I'm just going to heat this up. Wait for that to get hot. And then the beef is going to go in here. What I'm trying to cook here is a sort of beef crisp of sorts.
Are you going to put the straight ground beef in there? Are you going to do your beef tallow as well, or does that go in later?
I'm going to go a little bit of beef tallow, and then I'm going to put the beef in there.
If you don't have beef tallow, this is a question from YouTube. Michael Strauss asks, yes, what oil would you use instead of beef tallow?
So for me, I would use any sort of high smoking point neutral oil. Well, so, safflower, sunflower, canola, vegetable, anything will do, whatever you have on hand. Anything except for unrefined oils, like extra virgin, olive oil, and I would also avoid lower smoking point oils like unrefined peanut oil, for example. The other oil that would be used here instead of beef tallow that's very popular is rapeseed oil.
Yeah.
Rapeseed oil has a very complicated relationship with canola oil, but it is what Sichuan cooking is built on, and a lot of people gloss over that fact. Here in New York, you can actually finally purchase rapeseed oil. I found it in Chinatown the other day. Here, check it out.
Oh, cool.
And yeah, I'm super excited about this.
So I think we didn't really get into this. Maybe we'll get into this a little bit later, but you can also get unrefined rapeseed oil at themalamarket.com, which is a good supplier for doubanjiang and chilies and Sichuan peppercorns and things like that. So they've just started, I think, importing rapeseed oil, which was really cool.
So my oil is hot. It's hot when the oil is shimmering. You see how it dances a little bit? And my beef is going to go in. Turn the heat down just slightly. My goal here is to brown my beef, not to burn it, but to activate some of that flavor. Let's break that up. Let it do its thing. I'm waiting for my water to boil on the other side. And my tofu is going to be blanched in there. If you were cooking this with pork or chicken, I would suggest that you do the same thing. To first cook your meat to get some of that rawness flavor out of here. Now, one thing I like to do at this stage is I like to add a little bit of Shaoxing wine because this will take off some of that gamey, bloody flavor. If you're not using the best quality of beef, you need a little bit of help to do that. Instead of Shaoxing wine, obviously sake works as well, or even beer, or white wine, or vermouth, or sherry. Any alcohol will do the trick.
Are you I noticed that's a made in carbon steel pan, or Justin Fang over in our YouTube comments noticed that it's a made in. Are you a carbon steel,
yes,
partisan?
I am
or
a recent carbon steel fan.
A recent one?
Recent because here's the thing. I'm a Chinese cook and I cook with woks all the time.
Yeah.
I just don't believe in cooking with woks at home. Woks function because of the jet of an engine of a fuel that they have underneath it, and so you're cooking at like 700 plus degrees. If you don't have that set up at home, there's no real point of using a wok, which is to say you rather have a flat bottom surface that has as much contact with the heating surface as possible.
All right, it's 7 o'clock here. I don't know if you can hear the cheering.
Oh yes, it is. People are cheering. Which is to say a flat bottom pan probably works much better. I'm going to move my...
I'm going to mute myself for a moment so we can hear you.
Yeah. Here is my water. It's boiling already. So I'm going to season it generously with salt. Again, the purpose of doing this with the tofu is to blanch the tofu, tighten up that tofu, and give it a little bit of flavor. So that when we add it into the Mapo ragu mixture later, it's not totally flavorless, and it doesn't have to cook for too long. So you don't want it to break up too much.
So one of our YouTube commenters asked if you could use tofu skin or yuba in place of or in addition to tofu. If you were going to use that, would it be okay? And would you still blanch it?
Great question. So I've never made yuba mapo tofu, but yuba, generally speaking, does require a quick blanch. Depends on what type you use. Some yuba is dried, especially dry yuba. You would have to rehydrate it and soak it first, and I like to blanch that. But if you're using fresh yuba, if you're lucky enough to get fresh yuba, then I would say just leave that for the end. We're going to wait for this to come back to a boil, check in on our beef. You see how it's starting to crisp? Understand it's starting to crisp? We're just going to let that do its thing. Oftentimes when you buy a beef, the first stage of this process, it'll leach out a lot of water. Don't be afraid that water is going to evaporate. When that fat starts leaching out, that'll help it crisp more later. A lot of people, especially Cantonese recipes, don't do this step, so you don't end up with a super pronounced beef flavor, but you do have a sort of more moist, beefy sauce, or rather, usually in Cantonese cooking, a porky sauce at the end of it.
What if you were going to go in the absolute other direction, and as one of our YouTube commenters is asking, just go vegetarian? How do you skip
Absolutely.
over? You just not put the beef in and fry up the other stuff?
Exactly. Well, the first step I would do is I would substitute the beef with dried shiitake mushrooms. Dried shiitake mushrooms are very important because dried shiitake mushrooms have a more concentrated umami flavor. So you would soak them, rehydrate them, slice them up small, and then also just quickly activate them in the pan like this with a little bit of oil. That way you can get as much bang for your buck when it comes to your mushrooms. My good friend Fly by Jing, my good friend Jenny, who runs Fly by Jing, she does a really, really wonderful vegan Mapo Tofu that I enjoy a lot as well.
Is there a difference between Chinese dried black mushrooms and shiitake mushrooms, or are they?
I believe they're the same. They are the same species, but from what I know, and don't quote me on this, but the classification of dried mushrooms, of shiitake mushrooms, goes into sort of more finer detail for a lot of Chinese cooking. Different sizes, perhaps different species, even though they all look the same to me. There are definitely certain grades for medicinal use mushrooms and that sort of thing too.
Okay.
I'm definitely not an expert in the subject. So this beef is looking pretty good. You see the fat is leaking out. It's starting to crisp. It's almost there. It's almost been about a minute, I believe, for my tofu. So I'm going to take that tofu out. I'm going to do it carefully with a colander, try to not break it up too much. But, you know, it is a sauce, so if it breaks up, it breaks up. Well, actually, I'm going to wait for it to come back to a boil. Let it go a little bit longer. Oh, my beef is starting to pop.
Ooh.
Starting to jump. And at that point, you know you're almost there. Great. So I'm going to move this into my pan. Take that off the heat. Move this over here. Okay, so I'm not going to clean out this pan because it's got delicious beef tallow and beef flavor in here. I'm just going to turn it back on and start cooking the second stage of this. Okay. I'm going to start my pan this time with a little bit of chili oil. Junzi chili oil Junzi is the name of my restaurant. We make these chili oils that you can purchase via our website. But this is all, I found that it's really quite spicy, but it's a good starting point for Mapo Tofu. So just a little bit of oil. You can also obviously make your own chili oil at home or use other great brands that you have around you. Just use the oil part, don't use the crisp in the middle because it might burn. Turn the heat down a little bit and our aromatics over here are going to go in. They're called aromatics because they start to work when you can detect that they smell good. It's actually looking like it might need a little bit of help. So I'm going to give it a little bit of oil just to prevent it from sticking too much. Mapo tofu is not a healthy dish. It is filled with delicious oils. We're going to have to live with that. I'm going to just pan over to my tofu. I'm going to take some of this tofu out since it's come to a boil. Beautiful. You see that residual sort of like water is kind of like cloudy? That's the soybean. That's the unpleasant raw soybean flavor. Why would you want to put that in your mapo tofu?
Good
Take
point.
that off. They also have a sort of, the texture also tightens up a little bit. It's hard to tell via the camera, but we'll move this away and move back over here. So it's looking like my garlic and ginger and black doushi are starting to feel good, and I can certainly smell them. So I'm going to add my doubanjiang. Here's the doubanjiang. I'm just going to use very little. Here, I'm going to use about a tablespoon, I think. I apologize for what I wrote in the description below, but I just want to make sure. Well, there's a big difference between miso and doubanjiang.
If you were going to mix the two of them, how would you balance it? Would you do each?
I would probably I would start with half-half. You know, the Korean doubanjiang would probably be really great in this too. So now that everything is happy, now comes the stock. Here I have about half a cup of stock. I'm just going to let all those flavors come together. Beautiful sort of red color here. And then now is the time to start seasoning your sauce. So actually, I neglected to show you the type of seasoning that I have in front of me. But Shaoxing wine is the go-to Chinese cooking wine. We're going to give it a little bit of Shaoxing wine. And then we're going to balance it out with a sweeter sort of alcohol cousin, which is mirin. Mirin or mirin is basically, it's hard to describe, but it's very similar to sake, but it's sweeter. So we're just going to give it a little bit of this to balance out those flavors.
If you don't have that,
not going too spicy.
If you didn't have any mirin, would you use maybe more Shaoxing wine and add sugar, or would you just not worry about it?
Shaoxing wine and sugar works. Sherry is a really great substitute.
Yeah.
Let that come together. I'm going to bring that to a boil over high heat. Now, while we're waiting for this to happen, there's something that we need to have on the side, which is a cornstarch slurry. So the cornstarch slurry is a really important technique of Chinese cooking. I'll show it to you overhead so you can see it clearly. So here I have a little bit of water with cornstarch mix, kind of a 1-to-1 ratio. Cornstarch slurries are what Chinese cooks use to tighten up sauces. Tightening up sauces means that the sauce thickens, but also adheres to the food more tightly. And Mapo Tofu, and this is maybe the most important thing I learned spending that one day at Chen Mapo in Chengdu, is that you need to add your cornstarch in 3 distinct steps. The first step is to try to bring the flavors of the sauce into the ingredients, and then the second step is to tighten up your sauce to make it a little bit thicker, and the third step is to velvet it and give it the good texture. Now, I don't know whether this is pseudoscience. I don't actually know whether that makes a difference, but I've been doing it since. And those are the type of things you don't question. Because I already put ginger in there, so you don't want to screw it up too much. So my most important tip for home cooks is you got to taste your work. You got to taste your food throughout the cooking process to know when to take it to a different direction. Ooh, okay. I'm getting a lot of saltiness in a pleasant way. The ginger is right at the back a little bit. It's a little strong. So for that reason, I think I'm going to have to sweeten it up a little bit. I'm actually going to give it a little bit of sugar at this time. You know how a lot of people add salt to their cupcakes? Chinese cooks add sugar to their savory dishes to make it taste more savory, just as you add a little bit of salt to make your cupcakes a little bit sweeter. Genius tips. Okay, so now that this is happy and going, you see how it's kind of like a reddish brown color? It is not the most, I would say, appetizing color. The way to fix this is with a touch of soy sauce. Now, there are 2 main types of soy sauce. This is a gross oversimplification, but there is light soy and dark soy. Here is superior dark soy sauce. Dark soy sauce is for color. Light soy sauce is for saltiness. I already said that this dish is really quite salty, which means I don't want to add too much extra salt to it. I just want to give it a little bit of soy sauce to tighten it up to make it a dark color. At Chen Mapo, they actually interestingly color their tofu too. They give a little bit of dark soy into the blanching liquid. Great. So now that this is boiled, we're pretty much ready. I am taking a luxurious amount of time to make this Mapo Tofu. Usually it's quite a quick dish. So this tofu, let's drain off some of this extra water. Here is the tofu. I'm gonna add maybe 2/3 of this because I don't have that much sauce. I'll save the rest for later.
My wife would be so upset. She would just say, "Put it all in. What are you gonna do with?"
No, save it for instant noodles. You know. So you see how the sauce is right up to the halfway point of the tofu? That's what you want. You see how it's starting to glaze over it? The tofu is slowly absorbing it, and it finally looks good because we added a little bit of that dark soy. This is what you want. Tofu's gonna go in. We're gonna let that simmer for a little while. Oh, you know what I just realized I have? Let me grab something.
What are you getting?
So I just realized I had these garlic chives.
Oh, yeah.
So these garlic chives are flour and garlic chive. So this is usually used as a stir fry. But the other important thing about the original version, the Chengdu version of Mapo Tofu, is that the finishing isn't done with scallion, but the finishing is actually done with Chinese chives. So we're gonna chop up some of these garlic. I totally forgot that I had these.
Yeah. Which kind of chives do they use those jiucai, or do they use
so jiucai is they use from my experience they use the flat Chinese chives, which are called jiucai. So we're just gonna dice this up sort of fine. Throw this in at the end. The flour and garlic chives are less pungent than Chinese chives. If you don't have this, you can also obviously substitute with the scallion greens, which I actually had prepared.
Right.
But I love these chives right at the end, and they're put in basically raw. Really balances out the intensity of the dish. Okay, now back to the cooking. So all of this is glazed up. Let me just taste this real quick again. Wow. This looks delicious enough. That could be on the box of instant Mapo Tofu from Japan. That's always the aesthetic they're aiming for. Okay, so this is good to go. The beef, again, is a flavor in this dish. It's not, I know I kept saying ragu, but unlike ragu, this is not the building block. This is not the fundamental of the dish. This is just sort of the accoutrement, and the tofu and the doubanjiang are really the top stars. So I had about half a pound of beef here. I'm just gonna add all that in, all the fats and all, and then I'm just gonna slowly push it. Try not to break up the tofu too much. The breaking of the tofu is a ritual that belongs to the diner, not the cook.
That's why I always bake it up myself. I'm usually the one eating it. So
yeah,
just heavy hand there. One of our commenters noticed that you didn't wash your chives.
Hey,
but, you know, I presume
I just believe in my supply.
Your restaurant, you always wash everything.
Yes, we do.
And I also hear that we have viewers right now from Mexico, Australia, and Switzerland. So this is kind of, I want to know, what does Mapo Tofu taste like in Mexico?
Yeah, exactly.
If you guys can tell us in the comments, please, I would love to hear that.
I just added a little bit of water because I wanted a little bit more liquid in here to tighten up later. I would say that speaking of sort of like Chinese food outside of China, the Sichuan people aren't really immigrants or migrants. They don't really emigrate away from Sichuan easily, or often until recently, compared to the Hakka people or the Cantonese people. So any sort of Sichuan cooking like Mapo Tofu in places like Mexico or Sweden would have been something that's happened a lot later.
Yeah.
So at this point, at some of the restaurants I've cooked at in Chengdu, they would pour an additional layer of oil over the top. Why? That oil oil insulates food a lot better than water does. And it's really, really important that Mapo Tofu is hot. If it's not hot, it doesn't taste good. I just tilt the heat off. I'm going to put my, we're going to pretend that we wash these chives. And I'm just going to, you see, let's just finish this dish. Makes it so much prettier. Chives over the top, pull that in. Nice garlic chives. Put it all together. And the last step for this is going to be the ground up sansho, or the Sichuan peppercorn. So let me just go grab a pretty plate.
The most important part. Lucas, what's how long have you had your Sichuan peppercorns? One of our commenters, Rurid Patterson, is asking, what's the shelf life on Sichuan peppercorns?
I believe Sichuan peppercorns are shelf life stable because they are a dried herb. Though I am not sort of a fanatic about the Sichuan peppercorn, I just like getting it from credible single origin sources if possible. Yeah. So the best place in Sichuan to get Sichuan peppercorns is Hanyuan, which produces peppercorns that are often more floral, but also picking it is really important. So if you look at these green Sichuan peppercorns, you'll notice that there aren't a lot of sort of black seeds in the middle. Here's one that has one. I'm gonna try to pick it up and show the camera if you can see. You see how the middle there's a black seed? That black seed is actually very bitter and unpleasant. And fancy Sichuan restaurants will soak all their peppercorns and pick all those out manually. But by and large, you can tell that most of these peppercorn husks don't have that seed in the middle, which is a sign of a very good producer. And I think that makes a big difference. A lot of people like to go heavy on the Sichuan peppercorn, and they end up with a very bitter dish, and that often is why.
Before you add those in, some commenters are wondering what happened with the cornstarch.
Oh my God! Oh God! Thank you, YouTube. You guys are the best.
I think that may be the first time anyone has ever said that about YouTube commenters.
No, they are really the best. I mean, I've been doing a lot of these demos. Now might be a good time to shout out Share a Meal. Our restaurant here in New York has been working really hard to feed healthcare workers. And we've been hoping to do a lot of fundraisers with Share a Meal. And almost every single demo I've done, I have forgotten a certain component, and live commenters have reminded me of the fact, which has saved the dish. So, can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So here is the bubbling Sichuan Mapo Tofu. It has to bubble, otherwise the cornstarch won't activate. So we're gonna go one. This is the first layer of it. This is supposedly the layer that brings the flavor. You see how I don't really believe in this principle? It's supposed to bring the flavors of the sauce into the tofu.
Do you want to just add some more ginger right now too?
Yeah. Man, I don't know if I'm allowed to step foot in Chengdu anymore after this. So you see how that sauce is tightening. You can see on the side. It's almost like the thing that coats the back of the spoon, which is the French technique, and a tiny bit more at the end. 3 layers. But that said, I would say that adding cornstarch in 3 layers like this is important in order to make sure that your cornstarch doesn't break. Cornstarch, sometimes when you heat it too aggressively, will tend to stop the emulsification process, so it just split. So add your cornstarch right at the end. Don't add it too early. But adding it in 3 steps means that you're less likely to add too much or too little at the same time. So here it is. You can tell that it's tight. The sauce is tight, right? So that's what you want. It's nice and glossy. Time to plate. Any other tips? Anybody else notice I forgot to do anything? Okay. I hope
Speak now or forever hold your peace, commenters.
Or maybe I'll just sit and eat this and it just won't be good and I won't know why. So here is a pretty little plate. We're going to put the Mapo Tofu on top. You can tell that the longer we cook that beef, that a layer of fat will come up the top. For home style uses, or home style cooking, I don't really mind not having too much oil over the top because, you know, we are a little bit health conscious here. So jiggly, not too much sauce running around the sides. It's not watery. If it's watery, it means the flavor isn't clinging to the tofu. And let's just, for argument's sake, finish this with a little bit of green scallion for color. And
One
the
of the
important
commenters
part,
is asking about sesame oil. Would you ever drizzle
yes,
that in?
sesame oil is a huge part of Cantonese cooking and oftentimes used to finish sauces. I would say that sesame oil doesn't have its place here in this dish for me, but you may disagree. So I ground up some sansho in the mortar and pestle. It's very citrusy. It's very nice. Just over the top. Some other dishes in Sichuan that I've had have a hybrid of this dish by after they sprinkle that peppercorn over the top, they will heat up hot oil to like 400 degrees or so.
Yeah.
And just pour it over, it'll sizzle, which is also a very elegant way of doing it. But here you are, a beautiful plate of Mapo Tofu.
Gorgeous.
Made mostly Sichuanese style with a little bit of a Cantonese twist by adding a little bit of soy sauce to fix the color. Some Japanese mirin in here. I would honestly use miso if I had miso, but from the Sichuan basis, I have bastardized this Mapo Tofu so in unimaginable ways to the people who invented it, but that's what's necessary to
Pretty
make
clearly you're going to eat this with rice, but
yes, I am.
we need some vegetable with this too. Do you have an ideal like green vegetable, some kind of chincai that is going to like the perfect thing that goes with this?
Boiled lettuce. People here in the U.S. don't cook their leafy greens. They like to eat them in salad, which is the most bewildering thing to me. But boiled lettuce is a real treat, and it's also I think it balances out the flavor of mapo. That said, I have seen videos of famed chef Yu Bo, who it was the master chef who taught Danny Bowen before he opened Mission Chinese, and he says that a perfect plate of mapo tofu doesn't need any accoutrements in and of itself. It is a perfect dish, which is a very sort of Chinese grandmaster chef thing to say. So here it is. I hope those of you who have cooked along haven't burned your mapo tofu, or that it looks equally, if not more delicious than this. Here you go. Just look at it. I'm very proud of this. I think it looks pretty delicious and authentic. All the steps are, we'll do a quick review. First thing, tofu needs to be blanched. Otherwise, it's going to taste like water. Second, beef or pork or chicken or mushroom that you use has to be activated. Otherwise, you won't get those flavors. Third, activate your active aromatics, and then your fava bean or your miso paste, and then add the tofu, add the stock in, cook the tofu in the stock a little bit, and then finish it with the ground meat that we had beforehand. So that's that.
So hungry watching this. We've got about 10 minutes left. So if any people watching this have any questions for Lucas or any more marriage proposals.
There are more.
There's a marriage proposal for you in Facebook, which is where all great marriages begin. So please ask other questions, and let's see you take a bite of this, and I would love to watch you eat this and taste it vicariously. So you go for the tofu first. You're a tofu.
This is a tofu dish. It's not called mapo beef with tofu.
The sauce. It's so like. All right, good. Can you tell? I need to know a little bit about Junzi Kitchen and what your life has been like for the last 3 months.
Junzi Kitchen is the name of my restaurants. We have 3 of them here in New York that are operational now. We've been open during COVID, and I cannot tell you how difficult it's been, but also how inspiring it's been. I think a lot of our store employees, a lot of people in the sort of Asian community who are in the restaurant business have really rallied to step up and care for their community. The way I like to think about it is we're in the hospitality business, which is to say that our job is to take care of people. Just because there's a virus out there doesn't mean that stops. So as essential workers, we've been trying to feed a lot of healthcare workers through our Share a Meal program. Share a Meal is your opportunity to donate meals to healthcare workers. For $10, you buy a meal, but the great thing is that also means that our employees are paid, our doors are kept open. And so that's been really important. The great thing about Share a Meal is that we work really closely with hospitals directly and other sort of nonprofit organizations to make sure that food is delivered in a safe way to the right people at the right time. So that's been a really great opportunity for us. And our tiny little 3 restaurants, we've served about 5,000 meals already as of yesterday, I believe. So I'm really proud of them for that.
What's the URL for Share a Meal? Is it that just shareameal.com?
You'll find it in your YouTube description. Okay. I love doing that. Down below, junzi.kitchen/share-a-meal. And you'll find all the information there.
Did you have to adapt the menu once coronavirus hit? Are you serving the same things you were before, or is it changed a lot?
We have changed it up in order to minimize the food waste. We changed up sort of the portion sizes of things, and we've encouraging people to buy family meals, purchase multiple meals at once. But we've also launched a couple of other interesting initiatives. One of them is distance dining, which is a 3-course meal where we deliver 3 courses to your door on Fridays. And there's a little bit of an Instagram Live, kind of like this, where I talk about the inspiration behind the dish. We work with different chefs every single week. And the idea behind these tasting menus is always, what is the relationship between Chinese cooking and the rest of the world? So it always goes Chinese X blank. So last week, for example, we did Chinese Korean, and we're looking at northeastern China versus Korea, and how a dish like jjajangmyeon or jjajangmyeon.
Well, yeah, of course, jjajangmyeon. That's that's the one.
We did a Chinese Puerto Rican dinner that was really exciting.
Oh, wow.
It was looking at Chinese people cooking for Puerto Ricans in Puerto Rico, but also Chinese people cooking for Puerto Ricans in East Harlem, and arguing that both of those have equal merit in terms of how Chinese food evolves. That's how I sort of, despite still cooking regularly, that's how me and my team have been able to think sort of deeply about these sort of pockets of Chinese history, and specifically about how Chinese food connects to the rest of the world. Because I think Chinese food, unlike most other cuisines, has a huge reach that is worth investigating. I really want to see a future where Chinese food can have as big of an impact on the culinary industry and people at large as French and Italian and Japanese cooking. Back to the share a meal thing is, we delivered a meal to a hospital in the Bronx the other day, and the healthcare workers came up to meet us, and they said, we've been looking forward to eating this food for so long. Like, this is the food that we've been looking forward to eating the most. And we didn't think very much of it, except afterwards when we were in the car, and people told me the story. I was like, well, it's kind of special that it's just so happens that Northern Chinese food, which is what we serve at our restaurants primarily, Northern Chinese food is what these healthcare workers in the Bronx are looking forward to eating to fight COVID. And this is the beauty of New York, but also, that's like how far Chinese food has taken us, the connection. And I was like, well, that's pretty cool. And so that's sort of the hope.
Do you think this has changed people's relationship to Chinese food? I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on right now, and what's
nice. A lot of it is unkind, but the best, in my opinion, some of the best community serving efforts have come out of Asian restaurants specifically. I would shout out at this point my good friends over at 886 and Raku and Whole Foods have been doing Bento Essential. They are by far perhaps the most successful and have the largest reach for healthcare meals in my circles. My friends over at CoPTM, Heart of Dinner, are serving the elderly in Chinatown. Rethink Foods is doing that on an even bigger level, and a lot of the partner restaurants are run by immigrants. And so I think that's sort of really quite wonderful too. And on top of that, I get to work with a lot of these restaurants that I mentioned, if not all of them, because we're doing distance dining and we can cook collaboratively and creatively while still sort of trying to do what we can to feed the essential workers. So I would have to say that it's been a difficult time, but it's been very reassuring that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing.
What does Chinese food in New York look like on the other side of this?
Well, before this, I think, sorry to everybody out in the West Coast, but I think the most creative Chinese cooking is here in New York City.
Yeah.
Between
East Village.
Before that, Mission Chinese. Before that, David Chang. It's just, and now it's not just the East Village. It's like, Flushing has some of the most interesting food in the world. Sunset Park, Manhattan Chinatown. A lot of it is young restaurateurs and chefs who are saying to themselves, I want to cook food that is in my blood, and I want to tell people my story through my food. Plus, new immigrants that are coming into the country and saying, I have food, I have regional cuisine to show you. And I can't wait for the day when someone says, it's not just Sichuan cooking, it's also Zigong cooking versus Chengdu cooking. It's not just, Southern and Northern Chinese food, like it's Northeastern and Northwestern.
Totally.
Shandong versus Tianjin. Like that conversation has just started, even in China. It was so cool. And I can imagine that New York would have that too, because we have the people and we have the heart. So.
And there's so much stuff to mine. Last summer, I spent several days in Guizhou, which is just south of Sichuan. And I had stuff there that I never heard of, dishes I'd never seen before, ingredients I'd never heard of before, flavor combinations. It was incredible. And it was like, I've spent loads of time in China and all over Asia and never had, never eaten in a Guizhou restaurant in Taipei. And like, there's so much more to uncover and to have people spread all over and, hopefully open some of those restaurants here in my part of Brooklyn, which really sadly doesn't have much in the way of good Chinese food. So if even you can come in, please open one here in.
Well, I would shout out some of the sort of specific regions I'm excited about in the sort of, I think the future of Chinese food must entail some degree of Vietnamese cooking.
Oh,
Vietnam is in southern China. It's right next to Laos. It's very close to Thailand, and it has a very sort of deep culinary relationship with Southeast Asia. But also, it's got these mountainous regions that produce, the best mushrooms in China. And so it's just this perfect blend of a diverse set of ethnic minorities, but also trade routes and ingredients. The other one is Chiu Chow. Chiu Chow is a part of the Canton region of southern China, and it's a little further up from Hong Kong, from where I grew up. But it's, in my opinion, my favorite region of Chinese cooking. It's where Vietnamese food, a lot of Vietnamese food comes from. Pho has its origins there. Satay sauce, which is everybody's favorite, anchovy sauce, comes from Chiu Chow. And so Chiu Chow is it's a really special sort of undiscovered for international audiences pocket of China that I would encourage all of you to look into.
You know what I love is you highlight that. The other thing is Andrew Nguyen, the Vietnamese cookbook author, in her book on her cookbook on pho, also mentions Yunnan as one of the origins of pho. So like there were immigrants from the two parts of China you just mentioned coming down to Vietnam and making their influences to create pho, which also seems like completely, totally, absolutely, Vietnamese. It's the national dish, and yet it is connected to everything else.
There is no such thing, there's no such thing as, or rather, a lot of people like to use the word authenticity to signal that, this is original. But there is no, that's a difficult word because if we know foodways, if we know food at all, it's all fusion. It's always evolving. It's always different. There is almost never a single point of origin. I think a lot about Peking duck. Peking duck seems to have its origins, according to my research, a couple of historians, in a 1330. So this is about 700 years ago. A 1330 cookbook written by the pharmacist of the Yuan Dynasty emperor. And so this guy would have been from modern-day Mongolia, and he wrote a recipe for duck that's stuffed inside of a lamb stomach and cooked with coriander and onion. And that seems to be the first imperial preparation of duck, and therefore eventually evolved into Peking duck. Has nothing to do with Peking duck as we now know it, but if that's the origin, who can say what is what,
I love that. That's beautiful. One last note from a commenter, and then I think we're going to wrap things up. Eduardo Nakatani, who is a chef, Japanese chef in Mexico City, says that Mapo Tofu in Mexico is more like the Japanese or Korean style, which
very cool.
I think maybe makes sense given migration patterns.
It's like, you can imagine that the sort of Japanese population in Latin or South America, in particular, would have brought a different version of cooking. Those of you who are looking for a hack, Japanese instant Mapo Tofu, really, really good. It's always, people always know about the instant curry, but I think the instant Mapo Tofu is has gained its rightful place on people's shelves when they're feeling lazy. Because this is sort of a labor-intensive process. But anyway.
Oh my God. I'm so hungry right now. Just watching you make and eat this thing is just driving me crazy. So
I'm trying to be shy about it and sort of like timid. So
no. Look, we're going to turn the cameras off in just a second and you can go to town on that. So I just want to thank you, Lucas, for showing us the ins and outs and making us all hungry. Thank the Asia Society for hosting this thing. And thank all of you out in YouTube and Facebook land for following along and asking us great questions. So see you guys around. Stay safe and eat well.
Be well. Thank you.
Bye, guys.